Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for Season 2, Episode 3 of A Studio of One's Own. This series of dialogues is proudly presented by DEC and seeks to connect audiences to photographic practices from across the region. Season 2 of A Studio of One's Own spans 8 episodes. Today, we are on our third one, and new episodes will air live on a fortnightly basis. At the end of today's 45-minute conversation, we will keep 15 minutes for your questions and answers from the audiences. So do put in your questions at any time into the Facebook Live comment box. Joining us tonight in very peculiar circumstances is Singaporean artist Sebastian Mary Tay. Sebastian Mary.
Hello.
Hello, Sebastian.
Hi everyone. How's it going?
So to introduce Sebastian a little bit, Sebastian is an interdisciplinary artist and educator who graduated from the Glasgow School of Art with a Master of Research and Bachelor of Arts with Honours in Fine Arts. In the last 5 years, Sebastian's works have exhibited internationally in the UK, Lithuania, Malaysia, China, and in Singapore, of course. Quite recently, Sebastian also partook in the Facebook Artist in Residence program, where he made a site-specific photographic print measuring 25 meters and stretched across 3 walls. So a very, very, very sizable photographic prints. He has been invited to numerous institutions for talks and guest lectures, including the City of Glasgow College, the Royal Scottish Academy, the Nanyang Technological University, and the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts. Beyond his artistic practice, he is also an adjunct lecturer at many of our local institutions, a very popular fellow going around and lectures at NAFA, LaSalle, and NTU as well. So Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us this evening in your rather peculiar circumstance. You know, you are currently serving your quarantine. So maybe you'd like to share with our audiences who are tuning in tonight as to why exactly you are stuck in a hotel room right now.
First and foremost, thanks for having me. Thanks for saving me from the boredom of quarantine. I was overseas for a bit. Then we're stuck in a very strange situation right now, aren't we? So
yes, we are.
When I came back last week, I was ordered to serve stay-home notice. So I've been stuck in a hotel room for quite a few days. Actually, I lost track of time. Time stopped completely, just like in a piece of photograph. Here I am.
And so you had your little bit of enjoyment over abroad, and then now you are paying the price for it, I guess.
I am paying full price for it.
So anyways, I thought like a wonderful way for us to begin our conversation tonight is to delve a bit into that history of your art practice, and then slowly we will get up to date with what you are doing in the present. And so to really just start this conversation off, I was hoping you could share with us a little bit about when you got started with photography and what drew you to the medium in particular.
Photography has always been a medium that was very close to me. I started when I was doing my diploma in Singapore, so that was more than 10 years ago. Wow. Okay, that was more than a decade ago now. I wasn't always a photographic image maker. I was a painter at first, but I got a bit frustrated with painting because of the uncertainty, the mess of paint. Yeah, so then I took an elective in photographic image making, in photography, and I was instantly attracted to the processes of a darkroom. It was very clinical. It was very systematic. It was very structured. The timing of each image in the developer to the fixer, blah blah blah, was all very structured and it was disciplined. I felt great in that environment, in the dark. So I switched over to majoring in photography. Yeah, that was how I started, and I never stopped. until now.
And yeah, and so your fine art training really did start in Singapore, but both your undergraduate and postgraduate training was done abroad, at the Glasgow School of Art. But by then you were really a little bit of a practicing artist, following your diploma in NAFA. How did going abroad have an impact on your approach to art making?
Never saw myself as an artist then. I think it's a very different world where I was trained. Upon my graduation in Singapore, we were told that we cannot call ourselves artists until we have quite a substantial practice, until we have done a number of exhibitions, a strong body of work, then you can call yourself an artist. So with that kind of education implanted in me, I never saw myself as really an artist then. I was just curious and I was just interested in a medium. So when I went over to the UK, of course, having the knowledge of how darkroom processes work and how to judge a good image, etc., those gave me an advantage. But I was easily able to indulge myself in wider vocabulary of inspiration that was overseas. Especially things concerning fauna, things concerning climate, environment. Those things were of my interest, and all of a sudden I was exposed to a great, immense wilderness that one does not necessarily find in Singapore unless you are in Tekong.
Right. Of course, the great unknown for every Singaporean male. But I also wanted to kind of go back a little bit. Earlier on you had mentioned that when you finish your diploma, you were trained in a system which says that you cannot confer this title of artist upon yourself until you have a substantial kind of practice. Do you think that's a statement that you, looking back now, you would agree with?
No. Definitely not. I think that there are different stages of one's practice. But as long as you have a practice, as long as you're making work, you are quite an artist, aren't you?
Right.
I don't think that and the term artist should be conferred to only people with a certain amount of information in their CVs.
Yeah. And I personally agree with that too. I think this great unknown that you talk about, being thrust into the wilderness. After your studies in Glasgow, I do recognize a little bit of this perceptible shift, from this studio, still life kind of photography featuring fauna. For instance, in your works, Flight, Ropalocera, and an inquiry into the marine condition. And then you kind of move towards stage photography, where you are at the same time a sculpture and installation artist, and the photographer of that sculpture and installation as well. And so, you seem to be captivated by fauna for quite a significant period of time. And in fact, even in 2016, when you were doing these stage photographs, you did return to this for a brief moment when you did Cuttle Dance. So what piqued your initial fascination with this natural world?
Always been interested in natural environment, always been interested in nature and the constituents of nature, like animals that I have been photographing. The images that you see right now are from the marine conditioning series, which was actually taken in Singapore. One summer when I came back to Singapore, I went to the wet market with my grandmother, my late grandmother, and my dad. We saw this amount of creatures there. I acquired some. I brought it back into my room. I didn't have a studio then, and then I started photographing them in 4x5 large format cameras. And I brought the negatives back to the UK, and I developed the images and I printed them myself in the darkroom. Always been interested in these animals. What I see I haven't lost my interest in fauna, in the subject, in the subjects of
Yeah.
fauna. What I think is I see them as particulars within the landscapes that I strive to create. So there is this universal, there is this general structure, which is the land, the world, which I try to fabricate. And then there are little things that are actually real. The butterflies that you see, you've just seen
Yeah.
it, they are real. The stingray was real. Actually, the Royal Scottish Academy gave me an award for that. The cuttlefish was real as well.
Very much real as well. Yeah.
Real
And
as well.
and
Yeah.
and this realness that you are capturing across these photographic works, and those and Cuttle Dance was a video, in fact. What were you trying to convey when you captured it, especially in those particular manner? Because they almost come across as specimens beyond a living organism in its original environment.
From the very beginning of my practice, once
Yep.
I got to understand the photographic medium a bit more, I knew about the intimate connection between photography and its ability to mirror reality. So that there is this intimacy with ontology when it comes to the medium. I didn't know how to articulate back then. So a lot of my photographic work deals with that specific looking into an object in detail, such like those egg images in my early work, or those fruit images that they look like alien planets, alien landscapes. Also cuttle duns as well. Interesting story from one fisherman to another. From
Yeah.
one summer when I came back, I'm big fan of cuttle fishing. So I caught a cuttlefish, but I had this entire studio all set up in my kitchen. So I knew if I were to catch something that day, I would drive home immediately, lay it out on the table, and just make a moving image of the pulses of the creature. So the cuttlefish is dead. It's definitely dead. How do I know this? Because the pupils were completely dilated. But of course, there are still electrical pulses on the body, and I found that subtle movement quite mesmerizing. It's almost like a state between complete death and being alive. So that was when I decided to make that thing. Yeah, it's looking into the details of what the natural world can offer. I find
And it's
that
all actually almost that liminal space between living and not living, that we almost always just kind of put our finger on. It's almost entering this realm of like the fantastical. And yeah, and in fact, actually, a lot of these in your later works, what I would call the staged photographs, you create these amazing realms. I think I like to call them like they're like sprawling kind of terrains. And maybe we can pull up some pictures of those. They look amazing. They could be, this part of the world that we had never been to before. It could be a place, perhaps in our dreams. What informs the development of these stage photographs, and how do you kind of like go around even creating them to begin with?
in the beginning, it started out as a challenge. I was looking for materials that I could utilize to create such spaces. Like the earlier ones that you just saw on the slides, it was all constructed in an empty fish tank. I needed all corners of the world and the landscape within. But I didn't know what materials I could engage with. I didn't know my materials as well as I do now. So I ended up using a lot of domestic materials, like these ones that you see right now are made from spices and herbs and cotton wool, a pack, ice packs, and a fog machine. Yeah.
Actually, when looking at the photo, it's quite unbelievable to think that that's largely stuff that came out of a refrigerator and maybe from a pillowcase.
Yeah,
That you can get to an effect such as that. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Again, photography's ability to replicate reality and then making an image like that. At first, I was very interested in the liminal space between the real and the unreal.
Mm.
So actually, when I showed these pictures at the Royal Scottish Academy many years ago, I've heard a lot of audiences say that, oh, did this artist go up a, a helicopter, an airplane, and take these pictures? But no, everything was actually in my living room. The more they, yeah, the more they see into these pictures, the more they realize that there is something wrong to them. And
Yeah.
then there was this realization all of a sudden that, oh, wait a minute, everything is not real. Everything is
Right.
constructed.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
that tension inside the head might be closest to what Immanuel Kant described as the sublime.
Yeah, and yeah, it is the sublime, indeed, and in addition to the sublime, with stage photography, if I can call this stage photography, there's always this lingering notion of this pursuit of the perfect image, which photographers such as yours who practice stage photography are looking for. They're looking for to capture that perfect narrative with the perfect composition, perfect lighting, perfect conditions to create that perfect image. And so to me, I've always kind of thought of stage photography as a somewhat like control freak approach to the discipline. Not to say that I do not enjoy it. I actually enjoy it a lot, especially when it comes together nicely. I love your images. But in your case, your approach, it also strikes me as this simultaneous surrender to forces beyond your own control, because you are working with a lot of materials which are by nature very ephemeral. They are, for lack of a better word, sometimes messy. Um, so, to kind of start off, could you share with us what goes into the making of these fantastical terrains that you capture in your photographs?
I think first and foremost, the pursuit of like a perfect image
Mm,
is inherent to anyone that is trained in the photographic medium.
yeah.
So yeah, it's true. When a photographer is camping up in a mountain looking for a perfect image, they are waiting and waiting and waiting.
Mm,
A certain amount of control there, but also a vast amount of variables that exist within and beyond the person as well. I
mm,
think that is what I am trying to replicate in my work.
mm,
But also as I proceed in my practice and as I study more about the natural world and geography, topography, landscape structures, the more I understand that the experience, academic term would be phenomenology, wouldn't it?
mm.
It's a
Yeah,
phenomenological experience
yeah.
of a person, a mind, a subject in the world, in the landscape.
Mm,
And I tried. I started to understand that this forces of one being in a landscape is much greater than anyone really, than any conceivable capacity of a human mind, and also the physical abilities of of a human being as well. These forces will always act upon you, and nature is not really a kind-hearted force.
yeah.
It's a it's a thing that is it's relentless, and anyone who's in nature find themselves subjecting always to the powers of nature. There is no overcoming nature. Nature overcomes you.
Yeah, indeed.
So I try to fabricate this set of, it's a framework of constituents like the light and the fog, the wind, and this landscape structure. And I just let everything happen. I just let everything do its own thing according to the laws of physics.
Yeah.
So there is this space of theatricality where all these actresses, there's all these elements that come into play and they become activated in this one common space.
Hmm.
Very interested in that. So to a huge extent, I don't I don't design what happens inside.
Yeah.
I design the framework and everything just happens by itself.
And what are some of those materials that you are actually using in, some of the pictures that we had seen earlier?
So I said I started with ground spices, dry herbs, flour, cotton wool, a lot of natural ingredients.
Right.
It's great when I show the sculptural form of them because there is this olfactory experience to them as well. Eventually, I move on to sawdust, plaster. So there's been a progression of materials.
So, given that, like a material like flour, you talk about setting up the conditions for, physics to kind of naturally shape, the final outcomes, images that you capture. So to a certain extent, to actually, at least from my perspective, to a very, very great extent, you are kind of giving away that control of how that terrain almost composes itself or recomposes itself after your very, very initial creation and formation of it. So would you agree with, that statement that I had made earlier, that to an extent you have essentially overturned certain preconceived notions that, one normally associates with staged photography?
Maybe if the connotation of stage photography is pure control. A lot of image makers, people like Gregory Crutzen, for example, have full control over the construction of their image. They will use up to 100 lights and colors to construct one image.
Yeah.
I don't do that. So in that sense, I agree with you.
Yeah.
The process is like, okay, I draw you an example here. Anyone who has kept a fish tank, who has been serious about keeping a fish tank or a terrarium would understand, because the fish tank always go wild on you, the terrarium will always go wild on you, and always changes the composition of what you started with.
Yeah.
Nature always take over. What you can do is you can mediate and find your way through, but you can never overcome it. You can negotiate with it, but you can never overcome it.
Yeah. And but having seen, some of, these installations that you have made in person before, sometimes, it's just not what you were looking for. Like a mound of flour or sawdust can, perhaps start crumbling before you manage to capture that image that you want. So to what extent are you accepting of this unpredictability when you're working with materials in such a manner to create your photographs?
I always accept the non-predictability. I always accept them. So there were so many times when I make a huge structure, say a 5 meter long sculpture structure using flour and sawdust, or plaster and sawdust. So many times when I try to reach up to a certain peak, it would just start collapsing. But I find that incredibly beautiful because there's gravity at work. And what I just witnessed is, well, quite literally an erosion taking place. It's the law of physics taking place. It's quite mesmerizing. It's a dance between me and nature. It's a dance between me and physics. I just let it happen, and then I just continue to do my own thing.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, the previous times I've presented the sculptural forms of my landscapes in the UK, in Singapore, it's quite adorable because you see wee creatures like spiders. They're going on a hike on the mountains, and you can see the trail of the thing. That's incredibly mesmerizing. I just leave it there. I don't patch up. I don't do anything to it.
So you've never been in a situation where you're like, oh, man, I wanted it, that peak to kind of like stay put, but it has not stayed put, and I'm going to try to rebuild it again or something in order to capture the image?
Nope.
Wow, that's actually, I think you've pretty much inverted, this that idea of the staged image in its head. You actually you're just staging the scenarios, and then you're just capturing what occurs naturally to an extent.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, I really enjoy seeing things happen. I think it's great. I think without that control, there's a lot more There's a lot more things that I can indulge in through thinking about it, contemplating it, through thoughts and admiration, and usually from those thoughts it would spring onto other inspirations into other body of work.
Mm.
Like right now, I'm very interested with presenting contact sheets as prints, as final prints themselves. Also very interested in by process images as well.
Right,
So
right.
yeah.
Yeah. I still want to kind of like talk a little bit more about these processes of, the studio stage kind of photography that you do, and as well as, your practice as, almost a sculptor. I had this lovely opportunity to visit Moments into Twilight at your invitation, and Moments into Twilight was essentially the physical experience which would serve as the foundations of Seeking Starlight, this stunning 360-degree background that was commissioned by Facebook for their messenger rooms. And when I was inside the space, it was one of the most delightful kind of sensory and conceptual overloads that I experienced in a very, very long while. And I remember when we were in that space and we were talking about that particular work, you had raised and you spoke quite at length about the concept of psychotopography in relation to these landscapes that have been created and that you capture at the same time. So can you elaborate a little bit on this notion of psychotopography for audiences?
Yeah, I came up with this thing called psychotopography. It is very academic word, but it's my methodology, so it's my framework of
Mm.
methods. Psycho is the mind, topography is landscape. A lot of these landscapes that I create, that I try to fabricate over the years, they are not based on any landscapes in the world. There is no references, there is no photographic references. You know how painters are sitting in their studios, and a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
they have like a picture printed on the wall that they will try to replicate the light, etc., etc.
Yeah.
There is no such references available for me because I don't want them. So a lot of these landscapes are built entirely from my mind. I
Yeah.
don't I don't even have a template in my mind. I just start making and I negotiate the form and the space from there onwards. So it's something that is very intimate to me. It's something that the process is very intimate to me, and that's why it is subjective to my imagination. That's why it is psychotopography,
Yeah.
landscapes from the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you're not guided by a particular reference image, point of reference and etc., you're going almost by sensation and by intuition. What kind of feelings kind of guide you through the execution of these landscapes? Is it a very, very, very consistent kind of feeling that you are striving for, or does it really vary, and how much does it vary from landscape to landscape that is being created?
There is always, when I make work like for works like Seeking Starlight and the one
Yeah.
that you've experienced, the huge installation,
Mm-hmm.
there is only one state of mind that I put myself in.
Mm.
It's grief.
Right.
I have never say this to anyone. I don't think I've ever expressed this sentiment in any of my previous artist talks before. But I put myself in intense, immense grief
Mm.
before I start making the work.
Right.
I
Can
don't
you
know why.
elaborate a little bit on this?
I don't know why it is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is this sense that we are just tiny fragments of the universe, things that we cannot comprehend. Maybe it is
Right.
this understanding that time will pass and everything will fade away. Maybe it is this, it might be, the premise of it might be emotional or it might be intellectual. I have no clue, but it is something that is very important for me personally. in my practice.
Right.
When I want to start making this landscape, I always start in silence. Facebook asked me the same question when they interviewed me as well. They asked me, how do you start the process of your making? Always
Yep.
in silence and always in grief.
Mm. And indeed, this landscape, one can feel incredibly small when encountering these landscapes, whether in the photographs or whether, like me, when I experienced that installation in person. And one is also so cognizant of how these terrains are actually composed of the most minuscule of particles almost, that what we are looking at on the table is actually flour that forms mountains and valleys and gullies all at the same time. uh, is that a type of reaction that you seek to elicit from your audiences and people who are looking at your works?
A lot of them, I think a lot of them from the feedbacks I've gathered, it's they don't know that these structures are made from such ephemeral
Mm,
materials. They usually would presume that these are permanent structures, but they're not.
mm,
People are usually tempted to interact with my structures by touching them and stuff like that.
yeah.
I'm not bothered with that. People, people want to touch. They just do it. They would make caves in my mountains with their fingers and stuff, or they would go too close and they would sneeze, and it's like a hurricane blowing through the landscape. I just let everything be. Really,
Right, right, right.
there's this sense of whatever is in front of you, whatever you're experiencing is just there for the moment, for the present.
Mm,
And then there is no time, there is no past because the past has stopped to exist. And there is
yeah.
no future because the future has yet to come.
Mm,
So the only time left with is the present. And every time you walk into the space again to see the work, it's a different kind of landscape because gravity would work itself, the laws of physics would work itself, and the peaks will collapse, and more fractures will form. And eventually, at the end of an installation, at the end of a show, everything gets torn down, everything gets taken apart. Nothing remains. And I
right.
think that was what I was seeking for when I made photographs of these structures.
Mm,
The work eventually would exist solely in the photographs
mhm.
and nowhere else.
Right, I see, I see. So they've really kind of gone back to that liminal, extremely liminal abstract space in which, they originated from, and that's actually quite a poetic gesture almost. And I think I'm really admiring that sense of magnanimity that you have in terms of how audiences kind of approach and interact with your works. Because if I had spent days at building a particular terrain and someone was to sneeze into it and cause a hurricane, or put their finger into it and create a cave where there was where a cave was not before, I think I would personally be uh fairly triggered, fairly triggered. So I'm really impressed and amazed by that. But actually, right now, there's actually one more thing that I have just become very, very cognizant of as you were looking through some of the photos that you had shared with us. That is that your use of light in lighting these terrains. Um, I noticed that in some of the earlier terrains that you had created, the colors that are manifest are actually created from the particles that you choose to use. So I think in one of the earlier photos, you mentioned that you use herbs
Hmm.
to create the green textures of the mountainside. But in these photos that we're looking right now on the screen, it's essentially plain flour, right? That composes all of these terrains, and all of the colors that we see is done by lighting, solely by lighting itself, to create this myriad of effects. So, at what point did you make this shift to make the colors that are observed, that pure in a sense, that's just generated from light alone?
When I realized that the experience of landscape is not just the forms of the landscape, but
Mm-hmm.
everything else, such like the wind that is um, caressing your hair, or the light that is blinding your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That was when I realized that the experience of a landscape is not solely constituted within the forms of the landscape, but also the greater environment of the
Yeah.
landscape. Then I started looking at light, because light informs us a lot. You walk into a room and the room is warm lighting, and you will feel more comfortable if the room is cool fluorescent lighting.
Mm-hmm.
There is this distance. There is this psychological distance in it. Light affects our mood. Light affects our experiences. Then the rest of my exploration and my experiment with light and the colors is actually inspired by our country. This tiny
Right.
island in the tropics, because light is so intense here. It's inspired the entire Nanyang style here. So what can I do with light? What can I do with the vocabulary of colors? Because colors and light they are entangled. You can't separate them. When
Mm.
there is color, light, temperature, right? So what can I do with them? That was when I really started to experiment and exploit colors and light in my work.
Yeah.
What I realized in the later part of my work, when I use flour or plaster, even white materials to make to construct the forms of my landscapes, um, they reflect light.
Mm.
White does that.
Yeah.
So that's when things start to get interesting. And also the addition of a fog machine and a fog in that space as well. I use very heavy fog, so it's almost like white pigment.
Mm-hmm.
So everything it's like white pigment on white landscape, and light goes. This is a bit of materiality. The light goes completely bonkers in that space. It starts to merge, it starts to melt, it starts to diffuse, things go crazy, and that's when things get exciting for me. There is this uncertainty where okay, I'll just admire, sit there and admire, and then I would know, okay, this is the moment to take the image. This is it. Then one image is being made, and that's it.
Right. And and it's so it's almost painting with light. That's actually what you're doing, and that camera is just the film on the camera is just becoming your canvas, and you're just using light. It's almost in a way photography in its purest form. Uh, Over the course of our conversation so far, we've actually really thrown about quite a lot of very heavy going philosophical terms. We have gone from the sublime to phenomenology to Immanuel Kant to the subconscious, psychotopography. There's just a few that come off at the top of my head right now, covering our conversation so far. You know, and so at this point, right, in addition to your art practice, you are also an educator. You have very wide-ranging research interests, art history, philosophy, quite obviously, critical theory, the history of photography, and theory of photography. So in this process of making, this realm of the sensorial, when you have plunged yourself into this moment of silence and grief, how are you consciously injecting these considerations from your perhaps realm of research and academia into the art that you're making?
It's not conscious at all.
Yeah.
I don't consciously try to breach theoretical understanding of a topic to my making. When I am making, I am just making. I am a
Mm.
maker. I'm not a thinker. Um, but I do enjoy theory. I do enjoy reading and writing. So a lot of my research and a lot of my teaching as well, it's predominantly theory, like in the
Mm-hmm.
various schools that I teach. Um, Someone recently asked me if I find myself more a theorist or an artist, and I don't think one I don't find myself dichotomized in such a manner.
Yeah.
I think the thinking informs practice and practice informs thoughts. And it's always this feedback that drives a person forward. Well, it drives me forward. So thinking and making to me is really an ontological question about being.
more we are answering a question to like kind of like disambiguate the philosophy with like another heavy dose of philosophy once again, the ontological question.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Okay, so then as an educator, I want to put you into that that theorist's shoes right now. I think to a very, very large extent that I'm of the mind that because you have digested so much of this critical theory and philosophy, it has already melded into your being. It perhaps you don't even need to consciously tap into it, and it kind of emerges some way out from your subconscious. It's part of that making process that you have, which is why sometimes when we have a conversation about your work, we can really take a really deep dive into some of these fundamental questions of pertaining to art making, pertaining to even existence itself. So okay, well, that was a really long lead up, but the point that the question I'm trying to ask is, as an educator, then what would you regard as the most crucial fundamentals in developing an art practice?
In developing an art practice is to keep making, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The more you make, the sharper you're going to get. I tell a lot of my students, I find a lot of my young students, they struggle with what the lecturers say, what the lecturer's feedback is, if this is contextually appropriate, how can I develop the concept of this work and this and not. I think a lot of times when one's practice has evolved, one stops thinking about all these questions and one just make. And there is this greatest joy in making. And in the process of making, there is this sharpness that you can't get from anything else in experiences of life, in life. And I think that is the point that students, young practitioners should pursue. I think that is the goal that they should be aiming for. The more you make, the sharper you're going to get. Your senses, your senses is going to get more critical. It's going to get sharper. But also don't be bored. I think boredom is like it's antithetical to an artist. An artist is never bored.
Yeah.
A curator is never bored. You're constantly intrigued with this thing or that thing, whatever the thing is. And if you're bored, then find something to restart that energy again. Then find something else to restart that chain of inspiration. Learn a new language, for example. Learn a new recipe. Watch a film in different language or whatever. Don't be bored. Keep being interested. Keep being intrigued with everything in the world, with everything that is going on in the world, from sociopolitics to the bowl of nasi lemak that you're about to eat for breakfast or lunch. I'm saying that because I'm really craving nasi lemak. Can anyone just send me nasi lemak now, please? Thanks.
Okay, our audiences who are watching this, kindly send our lovely Sebastian here a nasi lemak. Sebastian, I do have one last question for you, but before we delve into it, I would just like to remind all of our lovely audiences that we are about to delve into the question and answer section. So if you have a burning question that you want to ask Sebastian, to query him about maybe his philosophy, his approach to art making, his approach to being an educator, remember to put that into the Facebook Live chat box, and we will relay that on to Sebastian for him to answer you as part of the next section. So perhaps one final question to round off our conversation today. So what do you think, you mentioned about not being bored, and absolutely concur with you. Artists are rarely bored, curators are rarely bored, especially, and both of us as fishermen, we are, I think, masters of fighting the boredom, because we can stare at a rod tip for 12 hours straight and not feel bored at all. But then, what do you think is going to be the next development of keeping yourself not bored? What have you been experimenting with a new way of art making? Have you been looking into new themes or processes? Just something to round off our conversation tonight.
I've been thinking a lot about technology. I've been meddling with technology a lot, such as the collaboration with Facebook. I have never done a work solely as AR before until
Right.
that work. So AR became to me a medium. That's very exciting. So I'm not going to stop making empirical structures or sculptures or installations or photographs. I'm still going to keep on with it. But at the same time, I'm going to meddle and play around with technology and see what I can cook up. Yeah.
Okay, so we have one question coming in from one of our audiences. It is by none other than Gwen Lee.
Oh,
And you just mentioned about AR. You just mentioned about AR, and so I think she's going to push that one step further. And what she has just asked is, have you considered NFTs? What is your take on NFT art? Because I guess that's the hot topic in the digital realm of art making today.
Yeah, I've considered NFTs. I was looking into it a lot, and then I was thinking about it a lot. It's of course a hot thing right now, isn't it? NFTs. I have been thinking about how Nafa asked me to write an article recently about my thoughts on NFT, and I said that it seems like the tendency of artists right now in the world, that there are some works made not for NFTs, then there are some works made specifically for NFTs. So NFT is not just a platform of crypto transaction for art acquiring. It's also a medium now, I think.
Right.
Or maybe it's emerging to become a medium. NFTs are quite strange in my personal opinion, because if you have anyone who has read Walter Benjamin's, the production of works of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, right? You know that NFTs exist in the same machine that destroys its aura, the digital sphere, the dissemination. So I have been thinking of some byproduct images, which I briefly mentioned earlier, as NFTs.
And I want to throw like a follow up to Gwen's question there, because now my own personal curiosity is also piqued. You just resurrected Walter Benjamin. That was like, for I think almost every art student, curator, and etc. That's like your year one reading. That's the very first thing you're going to read. But Walter Benjamin is writing about mechanical reproduction. We are in an era that has gone past that. We are in the age of digital reproduction. The Pirates Bay founders, actually made a digital artwork which basically duplicated and copied MP3 tracks, ad infinitum to make a mockery of what music companies claim to have been losing. And the whole idea of NFT is that to have almost an object in this virtual realm, the digital realm, that cannot be reproduced. Do you think NFTs are about to turn Walter Benjamin on his head? Do you think that the new aura of art, we need to start conceptualizing the possibility of that aura being purely digital?
Yep. When Walter Benjamin was writing about that, he was referring to photography, wasn't he? And then the world saw this rapid technological development, and you see digitization, TV, blah blah blah. Everything destroys the aura of the work of art now. Instagram destroys it, Snapchat destroys it, filters destroy, AR filters destroys it. So I think that if the aura of the work of art does exist, then we need to redefine that. I think that mechanical reproduction and technological reproduction, it's not very, it's just semantics difference really. Why? Because the original German version was technological reproduction. It wasn't mechanical.
Right.
Yeah.
So corporeality has like nothing to do with it at all in your mind.
Maybe it has, but then we have to redefine our understanding of space and time again. Maybe that there is physical, empirical space and time, there is digital space and time.
Yeah.
But how does the digital mediate with the physical? Is it a spawn of the physical, or is it a parallel dimension? Then please go resolve yourself and then write me 3,000 words paper. Thanks very much.
Yeah. That sounds like Let's not go there. That sounds like we are starting to get into some PhD thesis level kind of questions there. We've got another question from one of our audiences, from Zui Cien. He says, "Hi Seb, I'm curious to know, do you think your time spent in the landscapes of Scotland during your time in Glasgow have influenced the making of your work some way or another?"
Yeah, absolutely. I've never experienced true wilderness until I was there, and there were so many times because because I want to catch a fish, I've put my life in danger. I've almost died so many times. Just because I want to go up to a lock that is inaccessible, that in the middle of winter, I've put my life in danger quite a number of times. And I think I'll continue doing that. I think those experiences accumulate, and then they subconsciously inform the work that I make. They're not conscious. Again, they're not conscious. I don't print out a picture of the highlands of Glencoe on the wall and then start replicating the landscapes according to the structures of Glencoe. I don't do that. Yeah.
So I think Gwen actually has kind of like a question that nicely segues into Zui's earlier one. To Gwen, in the early years of photography, the photo used to show the world, and now it's almost like the photo is telling us what the world should be. Her question is, what are the chances that there are existing images, perhaps even in your unconscious, that you retain in your mind, that are somewhat directing your mode of making?
Directing my mode of making, again, in the process of making, I don't think about how I want to replicate what I am making according to some geography in the world. The forms negotiate themselves purely on the surface that I am making, the theatric space that I am working on. It is not conscious, but nevertheless, I think there is an influence. There is a direct influence. Why? Because it's very logical. Being in those environments in the past have informed my being right now, and my being informs my making. So I cannot stay away from that chain of expression. Otherwise, it would be, to use another philosophical term, inauthentic. Heideggerian term. Yeah, I think one needs to be authentic. Authenticity is very important. Authenticity of the Dasein. Yeah.
Okay, so I think our time is almost coming to an end already. Oh, we have almost coming to an end. So on that note, this note of authenticity. Now we are in a particular moment where perhaps we don't have that luxury of almost always being true to our authentic selves because of the restrictions that are placed upon us. Like, for instance, I know a very, very serious restriction has been placed upon you. You are going to be stuck in that room for 2 weeks. I think, I'm not sure how many days and counting so far. So in relation to the pandemic, the final question for you tonight: how do you think artists can best make use of this pandemic period for creative development?
I think I think that's a very interesting question. I think that question has been thrown around a lot during the pandemic. A
Yeah.
lot of people say that it's technology. Okay, we can make work through Zoom right now, but
Yeah.
I think creative effort doesn't stop. You know, it hasn't stopped since the caveman.
Mhm.
No matter how many pandemics the human species have seen, it's not going to stop right now as well. It's going to find ways to seep out and express itself. So yeah, in the times like this, I'm organizing exhibitions with my friends in Scotland. I cannot be there physically, but I can still send my work there. I can still chat with them because of technology. I can still organize things with them, and I can be involved in ways that I still can.
Mm.
The pandemic it imposed certain physical restrictions, but it should not impose creative restrictions to any of us.
Right. Indeed, indeed. And I think you've given me like a brilliant idea. At the end of today's episode, we're going to make a work through Zoom. So we're going to like take this recording, we're going to make it an NFT, and then we're just going to like uh, look for some digital grants on the National Arts Council website at the
I
end
love
of
it.
our conversation tonight.
I love it.
So I think that's all the questions that we have. So Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us tonight for Studio of One's Own. It was lovely bantering with you. Thank you for all of the questions from our audiences as well. And so, yes, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We would sincerely appreciate your feedback, which you can submit by scanning the QR code at the end when this conversation broadcasts ends. And while you're at it, if you've enjoyed tonight's conversation or any of our previous conversations, please donate to the Safe Deck campaign to allow Deck to have a permanent home. In the meantime, be sure to tune into our next episode, which will happen on the 29th of July. And that would be with the photography couple, Chow and Lin. So we look forward to catching you then. Thank you so very much. And thank you so much once again, Sebastian. It's very nice
Thank,
having you with us.
thank you so much for having me. Thanks for enduring me. Yeah,
Not at all, not at all.
I'll say good night to everyone. I need to go back to actually I cannot go anywhere, so I'm just gonna stay here. Good
All
night.
right. Take care, Sebastian. Good night.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.